Thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to our city clerk, Teresa Bass, to introduce us this evening.
Thank you, Ryder. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to everyone that is joining us this evening and being part of our redistricting community meetings as we kick off a series of meetings that we're hosting this month. So thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you here. This opportunity is an introduction to our redistricting process that we're holding here in the city of Anaheim following the 2020 census. And then our opportunity to get that feedback and hear from you in the community. So we're really excited for you to be here. And at this time, I want to introduce you to our redistricting team. We have Justin Levitt from National Demographics Corporation. We're really happy and excited to have him here with us in this second redistricting process. He may be a familiar face to some of you, as you probably see the name, as he was part of our demographer that helped us as we adopted our first maps. So he has that history as we were looking at, building our district boundaries. So he really has that historical knowledge. So we're really, really happy to have him. We also have a Ryder Smith from Tripeppi Smith. So we're really excited to have their team part of our redistricting team. They have so much experience and a robust experience in community engagement, really facilitating meetings and really working together with the community to receive the feedback and being part of this process. So thank you for both of them for joining us, and thank you to each of you committee members for being with us here this evening. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ryder Smith to go ahead and kick off the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. I appreciate that introduction. So let's just pause here on the slide for a little bit more and talk about some housekeeping. So as noted, my name is Ryder Smith with Tripeppi Smith, and we get an opportunity to work a ton with National Demographics Corporation, NDC. So always exciting to get a chance to be on another webinar or workshop with my friend Justin, who I've had the pleasure of working with many times. Just a little bit of housekeeping tonight as well. So first thing I just want to note is this meeting is being recorded. So we're capturing both the visuals as well as the audio so we can have it for the record. And this is partly to make sure we have a good training tool so that anybody in the public who can't participate tonight can go back and watch this presentation and have a nice visual of it. It's also just for sheer transparency, which the city clerk's office is obviously fully supportive of, and the city of Anaheim very much believes in this process. And we're excited to be a part of that transparency with this effort to engage the community. And I'll just say too, because Justin's pretty humble, National Demographics Corporation, I'm always excited to work with them because they are kind of the most experienced firm in California that's really done this work. So this city of Anaheim is really invested in a firm in the tools to help empower the public in this process and have a very effective redistricting process is the goal. We already had one in-person workshop, and it was very well attended and a robust conversation with some really helpful feedback from the community. So we're off and running on going gangbusters here in Anaheim, and I appreciate you all helping continue that trend by joining us this evening. I will note, and I realize I'm saying this in English, but there is a globe at the bottom, and you can choose an English or a Spanish channel on your screen tonight. We'd urge you to go ahead and choose English if you want to listen to the English channel. And for the Spanish speakers, hopefully you understand enough what I just said to transition to that, but we did have our Spanish translator make that clarification earlier in the show. All right, so with that, let's go to the next slide, Gerald. And I will say Gerald a couple times tonight. He's our engineer that's working in the background to help move things along tonight and make sure you have a good experience. So my thanks to Gerald and the team for being here. Today's goals, first and foremost, is you get to learn from the experts. So as I said, we've at the city invested in having NDC here, and Justin is Dr. Justin Levitt, to be exact, is a preeminent expert not only in redistricting, but in redistricting and district formation in the city of Anaheim because of his prior experience. And this is a very esoteric process that happens only once every 10 years. So it's important that we take the time to explain the process and make sure we give you all the facts and information and answer your questions. So you'll get a chance to learn from the experts, and then we're going to take a quick overview of the mapping tools that are out there. These are the tools that the city is invested in to really empower the public to participate in the map drawing process. I would just say it's really great from my perspective as a public policy person and a communicator to have tools like this available, because unlike a lot of really big challenges out there in public policy, this is one of those areas where we really empower the public with the very same tools that are very similar tools to what Justin and his team used at NDC, with the goal of having the public genuinely participate in the process to draw maps, express their communities of interest, and in a dream, It's a map that's drawn by somebody on this call tonight, or somebody who comes to one of our workshops, who ultimately creates the map that is reviewed and considered and adopted in this process. So you'll be looking at mapping tools tonight. And then the important phase, right? So we've taken the time to educate and engage with you all and teach you about the nuances of redistricting. Then we need to listen to you. Tonight is going to be, you're going to hear a lot about communities of interest. And so it's always important for us to now pause and give you a chance to express yourself. And we'll be essentially asking you to use the raise your hand feature. And when you do that, we'll be using that to unmute you and invite you to speak at that point in time. We have a couple designated points where that's going to happen this evening. And so it'll be very clear. I'll be expressing that as such. There will also be an option to submit a question through the Q&A feature if you just would prefer to type it and not have your voice heard. And for our Spanish language folks, you will be able to raise your hand and indicate that you have a question you wish to ask in Spanish. And then we'll have you we'll have our Spanish interpreter hear the question and then repeat it in the English channel for us, so I can then answer in English, and then she can repeat it back, the answer in Spanish. Or you can type your question in Spanish language into the Q&A feature. And we will then have somebody on our team translate that into English and feed it to me so we can properly address your question. And then last but not least, after we've taken the time to listen to you tonight and hear, importantly, it's one of the most important things we do tonight is hear from you. Our goal is that you will leave this meeting empowered with information, understanding about what redistricting is, understanding the timeline that we're on, and importantly, in a position to go back and talk to your communities and your friends and explain redistricting, what's going on, and how they too can get involved in identifying their communities of interest and participate in the map drawing process. So let's go to the next slide. So you've all chosen to be here, and thank you for that. And for those who watch later and are listening, we thank you for taking the time to listen too. You have chosen to get involved. So it's a little bit of an adverse selection for me to explain why you should get involved, but I will just remind you, this is worth being passionate about. Democracy ultimately works better when the public is engaged in democracy and understands the issues. While Justin certainly has experience drawing maps in Anaheim, and he has lots of experience drawing maps in general throughout the state of California. You are the experts in your community, and that's why it's so important that we listen to you. You're the expert on what your neighborhoods are and where do those neighborhood lines go. And then finally, this is foundational to democracy, to making sure we are effectively ensuring representation for communities of interest throughout the city of Anaheim. And this is ultimately a once-in-a-decade opportunity. We will make decisions throughout this process in the map adoption that will be around with us for 10 years until the next census takes place in California and throughout the nation. So it's a really important once-in-a-decade opportunity, literally, to have an impact on how democracy works in the city of Anaheim. Let's go to the next slide. So as I said, we started at 6:30, right on time. We're going to wrap up by 8 o'clock, respect everybody's evening. We had pre-expressed that was going to be our agenda for tonight. We're going to go, Justin's going to take us through the process, rules, and goals, go over the mapping tools. We're going to discuss about communities of interest, and we'll get into next steps. And after we get through the mapping tools, we're going to pause and do frequently asked question, or not frequently asked question, excuse me. We'll have a Q&A time to ask questions. So with the next slide, I think this is the point where I stop talking and hand it off to our friend Justin to explain the process and take it away for the next few slides. Justin, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for that opening, Ryder. My name is Dr. Justin Levitt, as Ryder and Teresa both mentioned, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you virtually. This is our second of 7 workshops that we are doing over the next few weeks. So for those of you who are finding out about this process tonight and want to come to one in your neighborhood, we invite you to come out to different parts of the city to come talk to us over the next couple of weeks. This Saturday, for example, we have 2 meetings. The first will be at the West Anaheim Youth Center on Beach Boulevard, and the second one that one's at 10 a.m. The next one at 2 p.m. is at the Ponderosa Family Resource Center. And those are just 2 of the 7 workshops that we are having as part of this section or stage of the process. And the stage of the process that we're at right now is really kind of the early part. We're really just in the listening phase. There's no draft maps been proposed yet. There's no modifications that have been made yet. We are just interested in hearing from the community, from you, on your neighborhoods and community of interest, and hopefully giving you the tools that you need to participate in this process as well. Part of why we're so delayed, or part of why we're getting started so late in this process, is really outside of the city's control. It's the fact that the census itself was quite delayed. The census didn't release data, initial data, until August 12th. But of course, the state doesn't allow us to use that data for redistricting. They require modifications be made to move prisoners or adjust where prisoners are counted. And this revised data set will be available in late September. Actually, just last Friday, they announced that this data set should be available on September 20th. So that's the date we're working around. But who knows? It's up to the state commission to decide when it is, the state redistricting commission, to decide when the data set is ready to release. However, they have promised us that at the very latest, it would be September 30th. So we're considering a great bonus that we get it 10 days early. And this really kind of leads into the next stage of the process that begins in October. On October 5th, 2021, we'll have a public hearing in front of the city council meeting at 6:30 p.m. And our theme there will be to present those final numbers, the adjusted numbers that we receive from the state, as well as kind of a recap of everything that happened here at these meetings. And it'll be the opportunity, once again, for members of the community to express their view on how the maps should change. We anticipate that November 2nd will be the first meeting where we have draft maps to present, looking at different ways of making changes, including hopefully drafts submitted by members of the community as well as by national demographics. This is also another continuing opportunity to receive more public input toward the preparation of these maps. And for those of you who are interested in those maps, we'll be going out to the roadshow again with one community meeting in each district, plus probably most likely some kind of virtual meeting in another round of 7 community meetings later this fall. This all leads into next year. Our deadline for adoption being April 17th. We will be holding our final hearings in January and February to try to adopt a map and make the changes necessary to the current district map. So if we go on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the factors or the process that we consider as part of it. Does this map have to change? And if so, what factors do we need to look at in terms of these changes needed? So let's just hop on to the next slide. Here we've divided the criteria that we use, the factors that we take into consideration, into 3 separate groups. On that left-hand column where it says federal laws, these are criteria or requirements that the Supreme Court and other federal courts tell us are required in redistricting. The first is equal population. Districts have to have more or less the same number of total residents. This includes everyone, and including non-citizens, including non-voters. This is the number that we're waiting for in that adjusted data. Actually, we have all the rest of the data available, all the Voting Rights Act information, all the community of interest numbers. We're just waiting on that final total population count. Of course, we also do have to consider the Federal Voting Rights Act. This means that we have to consider groups that have historically faced discrimination or barriers to registration and voting. And while race or ethnicity cannot be the only factor behind the creation of a district, it must be one of several factors, many factors that we take together in toward the preparation of the final map. Now, for those of you involved last time, those federal laws are the same as we did back when Anaheim went to districts back in 2015, 2016. What's really changed now is this middle column. The state passed a new law in 2019 called the Fair Maps Act that listed 4 criteria in a new rank ordered list of priority. So for example, or not for example, but I say the reality, we have to take 4 criteria now in order. First is contiguity. That's the idea that all parts of a district must touch each other. You can't have a little bit of a district out in East Anaheim and an unconnected portion out in West Anaheim. No, you have to be able to walk or drive from one part of the district to every other part of that same district without leaving the district. Secondly, we have to talk about neighborhoods and communities of interest. I'm going to talk more about neighborhoods and communities of interest on the following slides. So let me just summarize this and say that these are areas with shared issues, shared problems, and shared demography that need to be kept together for the purposes of good representation. Third, easily identifiable boundaries is the idea that it should be easy for voters to identify which district they live in. So by using major roads or natural features or man-made features like canals and freeways, we can hopefully create districts that people can more easily understand which area they live in. And fourth is compactness. And state law defines compactness as not bypassing one group of people to get a more distant group of people. This is aimed at fingers like 1 block wide, chains of blocks to grab one particular house or one particular community. Now, these are rank ordered. So if our neighborhood actually does look like that, if our neighborhood is actually, say, along a particular canal and it's just very elongated, then we do keep that together, even if it would mean less compactness. So when I say we have to consider these criteria in that order, that's what I am talking about. In addition, state law prohibits favoring or discriminating against a political party or drawing lines on the basis of partisanship. Our database will not contain partisan information, and we will not talk about the partisan nature of any single district. That is prohibited. The state wants us to focus on communities, neighborhoods, and the physical shape and extent of the district. And on the right-hand column where it talks about other goals and traditional principles, these are other factors that courts and legislators over the years have recognized as important in districting, but they do not take priority over either the federal laws or the California ranked criteria. This might include shifting voters from one election cycle to another, so that if you expect to have an election in 2022, you don't suddenly find yourself shifted to a district that's up for election in 2024. It could include respecting the voters' choices, recognizing that the voters of the city have elected a council and that redistricting should not be used to target a particular council member. It also could be about preserving future population growth. If we know that some areas of the city are likely to grow more over the next decade than others, we can underpopulate to some degree, although not exceeding the bounds of that equal population requirement, in order to take that into account. And I should just say one more word. What is that bound on equal population? Well, the courts tell us that it's a 10% difference between the largest and smallest district. So that if each district should be 100 people, we could have a district that was over by 5 or under by 5, and we'd be fine. Or maybe one district over by 7 and 3 or 4 districts under by 2 or 3%. But that total deviation, that difference between the largest and smallest, should not exceed 10% of a single district. Now, moving on to the next slide, looking at what these numbers translate to for the city of Anaheim. As I mentioned, we don't have the final census data, the unadjusted, or I should say the adjusted, prisoner adjusted data. However, we do have the raw, unadjusted 2020 census data, which we're presenting here to you. And according to that, each of the 6 districts has to have approximately 57,804 residents. Currently, our district map is slightly out of balance. It's at 14.4% total deviation. The largest district, District 5, is about 10% over its ideal population. And districts 3 and 4 are each about 4.5% underpopulated. They need to gain population in order to balance these numbers. Areas 1, 2, and 6, according to the preliminary data, are under 1% each. So they're very close to being perfectly balanced under the current numbers. Now, in addition to those total population numbers, the data set that you'll see here kind of lays out the kinds of information that we're going to be sharing with the community throughout, the process. And this is just a starting point. But that next box down, citizen voting age population, that's the population over the age of 18 with US citizenship. That's what the courts use when it comes to using the Voting Rights Act or applying the Voting Rights Act. We also include demographic information about age and language spoken at home, about education, income, and even housing information. Where do we see more renters versus owners in single family and multifamily housing? A lot of this data, in fact, all of the data I've mentioned comes from the American Community Survey, an annual survey by the census that replaces the old long form of the census. And if there are other information that we need, other demographics, other statistics, we want to hear from you what those are so that we can bring them into the conversation if we need to, if we want to, I should say, not need. So if we go to the next slide, we're looking more at the Voting Rights Act precisely. We currently have 2 districts that have a majority Latino population by citizen voting age or eligible voter population, areas 3 and 4. And an additional area, area 5, that is almost majority Latino. I believe it's at 49% Latino. Certainly a plurality, or the largest group in District 5 are Latino. So this is a slight, and you can kind of see if you're looking at the maps, the warmer colors, the yellows and reds are areas that are majority Latino. The areas in blues, in the cooler colors, are under 25% Latino. We also look at the Asian American population on the next slide. While we don't see any districts that are majority Asian American, we do see higher concentrations or percent rates of Asian American population, particularly in the southern part of District 2 and in District 6 as well. So some population toward West Anaheim and also in East Anaheim. Again, the same coloring scheme. The areas in blue are under 25% Asian American. So we're not seeing majority Asian American areas. So if we go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of how we can show some of the demographic data, this map shows income. We use 75,000 as a break, and just the percentage of the population, the percentage of households that earn over 75,000 a year, according to the American Community Survey. So this is not as detailed or precise as our block level estimates are for race, but they give you a general sense of the areas in the city, the parts of the city, communities where we see higher income rates. And if we go to the next slide, our story map, which is available on the website, has all of the different demographic fields available for you to look at and zoom in more detail. You can kind of really get into that neighborhood level where you kind of scroll in and look at each area. And so this is something that'll help you identify how these demographics translate into communities of interest. I encourage you to spend more time playing around with this because it really is interesting to get into the differences. If we go on to the next following slide, one of the things that we have to look at more detailed is defining what neighborhoods are. And particularly the state law differentiates neighborhoods and communities of interest. Neighborhoods, it really defines as areas with clear geographic boundaries. So a single, and I mean, the sort of example that they give is a community plan area or a specific plan area. So someplace that everybody would agree because there's an official document saying this is where this neighborhood is. It could be small. It could be as small as a single condominium complex or as small as a single HOA. They could be larger communities as well, larger neighborhoods defined by history or defined by development patterns. But the difference is that the real definition here is these are geographically defined neighborhoods with a clear and cohesive identity that we all would agree on. Maybe this could be the attendance area of a particular elementary school, or the area bounded by very specific streets because it has a history of development or something that it was all done at the same time. And so when we think about neighborhoods specifically, I want us to think about these as kind of like the puzzle pieces that go into building up the district. And these are the ones that are very clear where they go. Maybe the edge pieces, if you will. But something like the Anaheim colony, which is very clearly defined in terms of its boundaries, could be a neighborhood, for example. And in 2015, we certainly heard a lot about the colony as a neighborhood. Neighborhoods can overlap with each other. That's part of the fun and the difficulty of the redistricting process. You can have the colony, for example, is clearly defined as to its extent. It also has several historic neighborhoods within the colony that may be additional neighborhoods that are even within that larger neighborhood of the colony. And this really contrasts with communities of interest. If we go to the next slide, communities of interest do not have as precise a definition. They are a geographic area, yes, but also a shared issue or social characteristic. The area is impacted by this particular freeway, for example. The area is impacted by this new housing development or this new commercial development. The areas that share the same social or economic interest in some issue. For example, last time when we did this in 2015, a great example of a community of interest are the areas impacted by the spillover from the resort district and all the short-term rental issues that concentrated in a very specific part of the city, not necessarily in one specific neighborhood or one specific community, but across several neighborhoods that were all geographically close to each other. We can disagree on the extent of a community of interest, is the point. Unlike a neighborhood, which has a much clearer definition or much clearer boundary, we might say that, no, this community of interest goes as far as Catella, and another group might say, no, it actually goes up to Ball Road. And so we can disagree on the extent of these areas, and part of what we need to do is understand how you, residents of the city, understand your communities of interest. Now, why aren't we telling you what your communities of interest are? Well, in two reasons. The first is that the law tells us we need to ask you what your community of interest are, not tell you what they are. But even if we could tell you, like, hey, this looks like a community of interest to me, I don't think I'd be right most of the time. Having done this, in hundreds of places across the state, the issues, the shared characteristics, the shared problems that define communities in one city can look very different even from a neighboring city. And so this is why we want to hear from you on what your communities of interest are, because they're going to vary from place to place. This is why the law is so vague, why it only says they would benefit from being included in a single district for the purpose of its fair and effective representation. It's because we can't tell you what your communities are. We need your help in figuring out what the communities of interest that matter in the process are. And I say that matter in the process because I want us to think about that definition. If we go to the next slide. Included within a single district for the purpose of fair and effective representation. There may be communities that do not meet this definition. What do I mean by that? There may be communities that are too big. You know, Central Anaheim is too big to fit in one district. So we have to think then about, okay, well, it can't be included in a single district. So what are some smaller communities of interest within that part of the city that can help define where those boundaries need to be? Same thing with West Anaheim. We know it's too big to sit in a single district. So where are the communities that comprise West Anaheim? Like neighborhoods, communities of interest certainly overlap. And we can actually think of them as kind of like the way that they build into each other. So that one part of the city, one larger community, is really made up of lots of smaller communities. And that's what we're kind of looking for here. Those communities that can be kept together, that need to be kept together for the purposes of good representation. And just as a reminder, these are not political communities, not partisan communities. These are about the shared social and economic interests that bring people together. And so, you know, I know this is a little bit vague on communities, but it's really the reason why we come out to try to hold these meetings, not to tell you what your communities are, but to find out from you what they are. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to be looking at not only doing these kind of public hearings and workshops, but also we're going to be engaging with a number of tools where we're inviting you to draw your own communities and tell us and help us understand what these communities are. And what we'll say is, just as a starting point, we welcome your feedback regardless of how we receive it. Whether you just want to scribble something in a Post-it note or send off a quick email, all the way to drawing your own map from the block level up. And so different tools are for people who have different levels of interest and technical skill. I won't lie, some of the draw your own map tools, especially the web-based ones, may require a little more training, a little more playing around before you feel comfortable. But many people say that it's worth the investment and end up submitting multiple plans once they get familiar and comfortable with the system. So just to give you a kind of overview, if we move to the next slide, on the district website already, we have paper kits. Those of you who were involved in 2015, 2016 may recognize these kind of maps. Now we have maps that show both the total population counts, so that you can just do a simple map that adds up the total adjusted or unadjusted populations. We will get maps with the adjusted populations once they become available to us. And as well as, if we go to the next slide, one that has an Excel spreadsheet that's attached to it. This Excel spreadsheet will do all the addition and subtraction for you. As you add population units to each of the 6 districts, it will automatically update the spreadsheet and you'll get more demographic information than just the total population counts. Either way, when you finish your map, you can either submit the the Excel kit that you use, or you can take a picture of your map. We have instructions on how to send it in right there, but also we have instructions on our website, redistrictinganaheim.org. So if we continue on, once we have the final data set available, we're in the process of working toward creating a couple of different tools. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. Well, the first is District R. This is your community of interest drawing tool. One of the things I love about District R is that it allows you to draw overlapping communities so that you don't have to just put the colony as a single neighborhood or a single community, but you can draw in the colony and then draw in sub-neighborhoods or smaller neighborhoods and even overlapping neighborhoods. So if there's an area, if there's a street that you think is part of 3 or 4 different communities, District R will let you draw all of them. And it goes down to the block level, but it really is this community of interest drawing tool that just lets you paint the city with these communities of interest. It's a little bit more user-friendly than, if we go to the next slide, our Maptitude for Redistricting tool. This Maptitude online, or Maptitude for Redistricting online, this is very similar to the one that we use as your professional demographers. It lets you go in block by block to draw your council districts. It gives you all the data, all of the different fields that we have available in our data set. It is very powerful. It is also the most difficult to use. We do have some help. We do have a quick start guide, as well as some videos that we've created for this cycle, where you can watch somebody create a plan and go step by step. But it does require a bit more time and commitment to use it. Now, because of some of the technical difficulties we're running into with the unadjusted data, these 2 final tools, the District R and the Maptitude Online Redistricting, they will be available once we have the final data. This is because we don't want people to start drawing maps now, and then we get the final data set and update the tool, and suddenly they lose access altogether to their maps that were in progress. We don't want that, because we want people's maps to actually get submitted, and we want people to actually get to share their communities with their community at large. So these will be coming out in probably early October, late September, early October, once we get the final data set. If we go to the next slide, we want to emphasize that this is just the beginning of the process, that we still have a long way to go before the final map is adopted. And really a heartfelt thank you to all of you for coming this early in the process, when we don't even have those maps yet of the new proposed revisions to react to. I look forward to answering your questions, and I look forward to hearing from not just those who are here tonight, but those who are watching our recording as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate the thorough and detailed explanation covering both the whole process, the goals and objectives, the rules we're operating in, extensive discussion on communities of interest, and now into the tools. So that was a lot to digest, and I'm sure it may have prompted a few questions. So I'd like to invite the public now to indicate that if they would like to ask a question. If you wish to do so, just use the raise hand feature. And what I can do is go and unmute you and give you a chance to ask your question. So please do that. Also, if you're in and if you would prefer to type your question, feel free to type that in the Q&A feature, and we'll see it open up there. And similarly for our Spanish speakers, if you have a question that you wish to ask, raise your hand and let us know. We'll unmute you, or ask the question in Spanish in the Q&A feature, and we'll have that translated in English, and I'll answer in English, and our interpreter will give you a response in Spanish. All right, with that first one, I have a question from David. So David, I'm going to allow you to talk here. Go ahead, David.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
David Clave, the West Anaheim Neighborhood Development Council. As I understand it, based on preliminary numbers, and if the community wants it, districts 1, 2, and 6 can remain basically the same. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, and I appreciate the answer. And once again, subject to the final numbers.
Of course, but right now they're all well within the limits, the deviation limits.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Justin, can I ask a clarifying question about that? Is it such that those could remain in order to balance out the other districts? Will they not have to touch those other districts in order to achieve that balance, or are those 3 independent and the other ones could fluctuate?
Well, the nice thing about districts 1, 2, and 6 is that 1 and 6 are literally at the eastern and western ends of the city. And so districts 1 and 6 only touch one other district each. And so if they're in balance, and they do not have to change.
Okay, very good. Any other questions out there from the public? I don't see any written yet, and I don't see any other hands raised who wish to, from anybody who wants to ask a question. I'll give you another 10 seconds to, there we go. All right, B. You are unmuted, B. You want to ask your question? Oh, hang on, you should be, you need to unmute yourself on your end too, I believe. Okay. There you go, B.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm attending tonight's virtual meeting because I'm not really able to, because of the obligations, to go to one of the meetings kind of in person. Are the in-person meetings at the other locations are going to be basically what you're discussing here virtually? Or
Yes.
is it a step forward in the process and it'll be different information?
So for the meetings that are happening right now up through the month of September and before the data is released, the meetings will all be very similar. So what you get tonight is what you would theoretically get in another meeting. The only difference would be who chooses to ask questions and the communities of interest that are expressed. We will have a whole second round of meetings after maps are available, is the plan as I understand it. And of course, at that point, the conversation will change because now we'll have maps and we'll have something for people to react to, and there'll be more conversation around those maps.
But our intent is that for those second round of meetings, we will put out a set of maps for the November public hearing. And we will not be putting out another set of maps until after the second round. So that second round of meetings, all of them should look fairly similar to each other as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent
Thank
question.
you for coming.
Thanks for asking that. Any other questions? I think one other thing I just want to note real quick while we're talking, Justin had made reference to story maps and some really extensive data. And while he was talking, I was off perusing the website to review that. So I want to just remind everyone that there's lots of information available at AnaheimRedistricting.org. Again, that's AnaheimRedistricting.org. And if you're actually on that website, or you go to that website, there's a menu item for draw a map. And in there are 6 itemized bullet point options for various tools and potential tools that will be coming soon. And of note is number 6, which is story maps. And if you click that, it'll actually open in a new window on your browser. And then you'll see the story map and all the detailed demographic data that Justin was referring to earlier in his conversation and presentation. So I just want to help navigate folks to find that information because I think it's really helpful. It's very extensive.
And that's also the same place you can find the one-page map and the Excel kits as well. We should mention that too.
Yeah, fair point.
Same page.
Yeah, you will find that the so draw a map is a pretty key page there, but there's tons of resources on that page. We certainly welcome any feedback and other information if you have it that you want to offer about that page or about that website in general. All right.
And Ryder, if I may, just to also add, on that same redistricting.org page, we do have the presentation that is being presented this evening, as well as a PowerPoint presentation, so the public can also download and review as well too.
Yes, so I believe that is on the schedule page. If you go to
Correct.
schedule and you'll scroll down, you'll see the past presentations and information, and you'll also see tonight's presentation, the flyer we used to promote it, the email blast we sent out. Excuse me, I'm speaking out of myself. That was the prior one. For this one, we have the Zoom link and the stream, and we will have the presentation linked up there once we're done tonight, because I actually don't see it on this link right now. But a very similar presentation with a couple map changes is available from the prior presentation from September 1st. Okay. In fact, while we are working, I can ask one of my other teammates perhaps to update that page and go ahead and get the PDF rendered and posted on the website while we're talking, because that's how fast we can move here at Trepepi Smith. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'll just give it another round real quick to answer any questions. Anybody have questions about anything Justin's talked about tonight? You got access to a full bona fide demographer here, so it's a great opportunity to ask some questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands go up, and I'm not seeing any questions come across typed. So we'll go ahead and shut down this part of the Q&A. We can always come back to it when we get into the communities of interest discussion, but why don't we proceed to the next item? If we go to the next slide. So as I said, tonight we were going to do some talking, then we're going to answer some questions, and then we were going to throw it over to you. It's your turn. So we're back to this discussion of communities of interest and understanding what is your neighborhood, where are the boundaries. This is something you've already seen, so I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but you had a very extensive discussion from Justin, or explanation from Justin about what communities of interest are. Let's go to the next slide. I want to give credit where it's due to our friends at District R in Tufts University, because they had assisted in developing some questions, which I lifted from them and then have repurposed a bit and got some magic pixie dust spread on them by our team at NDC to add to. But these are some, what I would kind of say are questions that should provoke some more thoughts about communities of interest, right? So thinking about who is a part of your community, or what are some of the common characteristics that unite a community that's in the city, and therefore that community might be a community of interest. Or what are some significant physical barriers, right? So if you can't really think about neighborhoods, but you want to think about, well, here's a logical, understandable way to say this is a clear boundary I understand, the 55 freeway or the 5 or something, some major canal or waterway that runs through the city, or train tracks. Those are common areas, but there could be others that could be possible. So I'd like you to think about some of these questions. And while you're thinking about some of these questions, or if you want to screen grab this, or you want to write down a couple of these and think about it, we're going to be entering the communities of interest discussion, where again, I will be inviting members of the public to raise their hand so that they can be unmuted and they can share with us what communities of interest they may think of, or what areas of the city they would identify as a community of interest that should be respected and understood by the demographer, right? This is where you share your expertise.
And if I could just add, Ryder,
Please.
If you like the current district you live in, or if you think that it makes logical sense, what we're hoping is that you can kind of tell us why, with reference to maybe some of these questions. So what makes that district a common cultural group, or a common, physical environment, or, what helps distinguish that community?
Thank you, Justin. That's a very fair point. One other thing, Justin, and I may have missed this in your presentation, did you get a chance to discuss the difference between the data we used in 2015 versus only 5 years later now, having data now? Did you get a chance to explain that?
We talked a little bit about the delays in the census data.
So I guess when we drew maps, though, and in 2015, we had to use the 2010 census data in terms of population counts, correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So we have updated ACS data that's technically new since 2015, but the population data is new since going all the way back to 2010.
Yeah.
So that would be the
actually
biggest.
Here in Anaheim, we'll be familiar with that because we updated our ACS data right in the middle of the process. And there were several council meetings where we discussed the differences between the new and the old data.
Okay, perfect.
So, every year we get that update, which is an advantage over the old long form of the census, where we only got it once every 10 years. But it's also a little bit of a disadvantage because it does update every year, and there's that slight change every year.
Right. Exactly. All right. So we've shared the screen here long enough. What's going to happen now is I'm going to invite Gerald on our team to go ahead and flip his screen share, and he'll be sharing his screen. And what we have effectively there is a Google document where we're writing down communities of interest. And our goal here is to hear from you in the public and then take some notes and write those notes down. And part of this is we want to be very transparent with you so you can see exactly what it is we're writing down and make sure we're properly documenting it. And of course, we also, if need be, can go back to the recording because again, we are recording everything tonight. So having said that, I want to turn it over to the audience. This is your chance to speak. Is there anybody who'd like to raise their hand and help us talk about either communities of interest, their neighborhood, where it starts, where it ends, what streets bound it, or what seemed like logical barriers or boundary areas, or what you love about the district you live in right now, why it makes sense as a district, or perhaps what doesn't make sense about the district lines right now, what you would like to see change. I'm going to allow for some awkward silence a little bit, see if we can use that to, there we go. Terry, you get a gold star for being our first one to raise your hand. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Terry.
Okay.
There you go. We can hear you.
Okay, good evening. So the community that I live in is actually borderline Anaheim and Stanton.
Okay.
It starts on Lullaby Lane as the line that divides Anaheim and Stanton, where the major street is Cerritos. And it goes from Magnolia, and the community that I'm interested in is from Magnolia to Gilbert.
Is there a
And
name?
then from Lullaby Lane to Ball Road, I'd say. It's comprised basically of homes that have been constructed since the early 1950s on the southern side, on the Lullaby Lane side, particularly between Magnolia to Gilbert, where you have the Salk Elementary School. You also have Magnolia High School on the Ball Road side. And then you have some more, apartments that have been built on Ball Road for quite a while. And I look at that square, so to speak, as a community of interest, because it's been families or residents that have stayed in that community. My neighbor has been here for over 60 years when they were initially built, actually
Wow.
longer, 70 years, where the apartments that are actually Stanton apartments on Cerritos, he said used to be a orange grove. So you have a lot of residents that are old time residents here.
Excellent. And is there a name for that area out of curiosity? Do you guys have a name for it?
No.
Okay, that's okay.
that
You don't
I'm
have to have a
aware of.
name for it. We'll come up with a name in the course of this process.
Okay.
Excellent feedback. Thank you for having very strong specifications too on the boundaries, the bounding streets, which are obviously natural indicators of lines, right? Because people understand where streets are and they know if you're on one side of the street, it's X versus Y. So that's very helpful. Did our Google Doc here that we're sharing accurately reflect what you said? Did we do okay?
Yeah, Gilbert typo.
How do you, oh, GIL. Yeah, it's probably a capital I there, but we'll get that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. Terry, thank you so much for getting us started tonight. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. So my appreciation, Terry, for taking the plunge and starting us off this evening. Who else would like to follow her lead and share some communities of interest that you'd like to identify or speak to and make sure that Justin, our demographer, knows about? All right. I see that B has raised her hand. Give us 1 second here, B. Go ahead and unmute yourself, B. And you are ready to speak, B. We're ready to hear from you.
Right. I'm in District 3, and it's bordered on the west by this 5 freeway. And I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. Bordered on the east by the 5 freeway and on the west by Euclid. And northern is approximately Lincoln. The southern area is approximately Ball Road. It's an odd shape because of the freeway, and I've often wondered why there's like a cutout in it, and it must be because of the population during the last redistricting, that there had to be an adjustment for population or something. So I just wondered about that.
Okay, so I think this is partly a question as much as she's discussing the district. I don't know, Justin, if you'd be okay answering that question, or if you have a recollection. That's obviously very specific among the hundreds of districtings you've gone through.
Yeah. This was a map that was submitted by a member of the community. And I believe it probably, I mean, this is sort of my speculation here, but I think it had mostly to do with population balancing to make sure that those districts were population balanced according to the 2010 numbers. So our question, kind of put it back on you a little bit, is since we know District 3 needs to change a bit, how would you change that district? Would you take the line down to Ball all the way across, or would you move? Would you add population to District 3 elsewhere?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
On the north part, I'm not quite sure how far to the north around Lincoln District 3 goes. Currently, there is some new construction going on the north side of Lincoln, just south of the 5 freeway and east of Euclid, that might in the future have residences as opposed to commercial or retail. And that cutout might need to be included as part of 3 now, or maybe more cut away in order to balance, say, District 2. District across the freeway is pretty well defined already. That's the old original Anaheim Flat area. I don't think that's going to change much. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
And your opinions are what we're after tonight, P. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was very helpful. I appreciate it. Any other folks out there have some ideas they'd like to share? We got the ball rolling. We're welcome more. Sometimes it's easy to start with something that causes a concern. So I would just make the point. If you think something's funky or problematic with a line that exists right now, or you feel it's running right through a community of interest, it would also be great to speak up about that. Oh, I see a hand again from B. Hang on one second, B. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
My question is, does this redistricting take into does it consider future growth? For example, the Platinum Triangle. There is a lot more development there than there was in 2015. So that whole area might have a larger population now than it did in the past. So would that affect the shifting of the lines in that part of the city?
Sure, Justin, why don't you take a stab at answering that question?
You've nailed it. District 5 is currently overpopulated right now because of that population growth in the last 10 years. It's added about 10,000 new residents, and there's one part of it that went from 0 population in the 2010 census to 6,000 people today, in a block that's just east of State College down there. So we, yeah, that's the primary reason why we're looking at adjusting the lines. And if we know that there's going to continue to be growth in an area, we can deliberately underpopulate that region. We can put fewer people in it than that ideal number. I would be a little bit careful about assuming how many people are going to move in, just because we know in this climate that, well, I mean, in 2010, there were a lot of housing projects people were discussing that never got built. And there were also a lot of things that never came up that were built. And so, you know, we want to take that into account if we know. We've got to stay within that 10% deviation.
Great question, Ray. Thank you. All right. Other questions or comments on communities of interest out there? Or again, anything about these district lines that causes heartburn or concern for you that you would like to raise as a concern?
And just keep in mind, if you don't feel comfortable talking tonight or sharing it in the recording, on the website, we do have a comment form that you can submit them in writing. They will all be shared with the council and with their consultants so that we have them on the record. So, you know, I teach at Cal State Long Beach. I don't want to force anybody to participate because I know that's never a good thing. But we do encourage you to get your feedback or comments into us one way or another.
Thank you, Justin, for making that point. There are, for those who are more bashful, there are ways to submit your feedback without having to encounter us here on this call or come onto the record directly or have your voice recorded. So we certainly respect that. And Justin also, as a professor, was probably observing my effort to use silence as a motivator for filling the void to see who could stand the longest of the awkwardness of silence.
Well, it worked. We got a hand raised.
Oh, very good. Go ahead, David, if you unmute yourself.
I just did. Okay, David Clave again. I'm looking at the map, and if we just say State College Boulevard, anything to the west of State College goes into either 3 or 4, and 5 then shrinks. That might get us to about the right number. Do we break up communities of interest, or is that major road a significant feature that would allow that to happen? And I'm curious about other people's opinion. It's just a possibility.
So thank you for raising that comment and question. Obviously, we'd have to look at the actual underlying data there to understand if it meets the criteria, but let's use it as a hypothetical to explore. So to our audience, and for those who know Anaheim, does State College Boulevard currently divide any communities of interest that you are aware of or could speak to, that anybody would like to raise their hand or be aware of? Is there a neighborhood that spans it or whatnot that if
And I'll just throw it out because we know that, and just throw this out to add to it, because we know that the south end of State College, the neighborhood or the developed specific plan area called the Platinum Triangle encompasses both sides of State College. Is that an area that rises to a community of interest under the law that should be kept together? Or is it too new to have that kind of identity?
Or are there just too many lanes of road between the two communities that people view themselves a nation apart?
And that's the kind of thinking that we want to start to do as we go through the process.
Does anybody have a comment on, perhaps David, you have a comment on that and your experience or observation on the Platinum Triangle, but if not, I would invite other members of the community who are on this call to raise their hands if they could comment on either Justin's question about the Platinum Triangle or in general, State College Boulevard as a dividing line.
Am I still on speaker?
David, we can still hear you, yes.
Okay. So State College, what is east of State College is currently Angel Stadium and the property that is possibly going to be sold to the owners of the Angels and be developed. The other half, the west side, is a lot of the Platinum Triangle. Are they two different projects or are they the same? That is a question I don't have an easy answer for. I'm just looking at that line and seeing the numbers that the top half goes to 3, the bottom half goes to 4, and you might be balanced. I had not crunched the numbers and the tool's not out yet, but it is just like we use Euclid between 2 and 3, just straight down as the border with State College work. And like I said, I drive through the area. I know it, but I know West Anaheim a lot more than Central and East Anaheim. And it's just a possibility. And you're right. I mean, Platinum Triangle and the new Angel development could want to stick together, but if we're talking about a development that's not even been approved 100% yet, there's some court issues and other things, but so it's a possibility. And are they separate?
It's a great question. And it's a question we ultimately, although there's, to Justin's prior point about specific plan development areas and those being some defining elements that may indicate a community of interest or certainly could indicate a community of interest, we really need to hear from the public to answer those questions because it's not my role and not Justin's role to answer that question. So all the more reason why we need to do sessions like this and hear from folks. But David, you raise a provocative question and put some specificity around it that is very helpful for furthering conversation and discussion tonight. So thank you for raising that. I see another hand up here. So let's go ahead and move on to Ryan. Ryan, if you want to unmute yourself, we'd love to hear you.
Hi, I do apologize for getting on the call late. Kind of going to what David said, I'm part of District 5 as well, and not sure of what the the opportunities are of the Platinum Triangle area. Do we know how many of those new buildings are occupied? What the potential occupations? Sorry, it's late in the night. And for future development growth.
Yeah,
And compared to other districts in Anaheim.
that is a great question. So I can't answer that question because I am not a community development expert in the city of Anaheim. I don't suspect Justin is either in particular. So hard for us to answer, although I'm certain the city has some sense of that. But Justin, did you want to comment?
Sure. We can certainly take a look into that, and we will actually be out in District 5 on September 15th, next Wednesday at 6:30. So at Sunkist Library. And that'll be a great time to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Is that open to the public of the District 5 area?
Very much so. It's open to anybody, and if technically it's open to anybody in the world, but
Okay.
certainly we are trying to make a point of visiting all the districts and being geographically diverse in where we're physically going. But we would welcome any member of any district to come to that particular meeting.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for asking the question. And you had made note that you came a little bit late to the meeting. I just want to note, in case you hadn't heard it, we are recording this meeting, so you'll be able to go back and watch it from the beginning. So you can enjoy the sound of my voice and Justin's voice for a good 45 minutes or so before we got to this particular communities of interest discussion that we're having right now. And also, in case you had missed this, much of the content of the conversation that evening will be similar to what we presented tonight. However, what we would hope is that when we get into the communities of interest discussion, it's going to be far-ranging and helpful to the drawing process as we hear from various folks throughout the city, but particularly perhaps District 5 residents, since we'll geographically be in their backyard, with an opportunity to hear from them directly about some of these very questions we're talking about tonight. All right. Any other comments, or anybody else want to raise their hand and share some additional insights or comments this evening? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for this help. We made note in documents here on our Google Doc that we are screen sharing. And I think we'll bring our communities of interest discussion to a close, unless, Justin, you feel there's anything else we need to cover? And Teresa, you okay? All right, very good. So Gerald, you want to stop sharing your screen and go back to our PowerPoint deck so I can lean on that to get through the rest of our conversation this evening?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So as has been referenced several times this evening, we have several more community meetings that are coming up. To this coming Saturday, West Anaheim Youth Center and the Ponderosa Park Family Resource Center. We're doing these on a weekend to help accommodate for folks that work during the week and don't have the flexibility to get out on a weeknight or a weekday and participate in a meeting like this. So we're hoping to see some folks out. On Wednesday, we'll be getting together at 6:30 at Sunkist Ranch Library. And then Thursday, the 16th, we'll be doing a meeting at Brookhurst Community Center. And then Monday, the 20th, will be at East Anaheim Community Center. And those last three meetings will all be at 6:30 at night. Again, we're trying to do those in the evening to give people a chance to get off work and participate. And of course, for folks that can't be there, we have this recording that we've done tonight to at least empower them with information and give them a chance to understand the totality of what's going on so they can participate. That content will be very similar to today. What'll differ is the crowd who shows up and the questions and the communities of interest they choose to express. We'll go to the next slide. And then this just speaks to the reminder of our timing on what's going to be happening next. Justin, can I throw it to you to kind of wrap up again, just on a high level, what's going to be happening here and when you're going to be in a position to?
Just as a reminder, our next major public hearing, this is when we're going to go in front of the council, is on October 5th. That's going to be an update to the data and a discussion of what we learned at the workshops, as well as an opportunity for people to continue to comment on communities of interest. November 2nd is going to be our first meeting with draft maps, including all of the maps submitted by members of the community up to that point. That doesn't mean that we can't still receive additional comments on communities of interest and whatnot, but our focus really shifts to the maps in November. In November and December, we plan on going back out to the community for another round of neighborhood community workshops. That will all culminate in early, I could say early 2022, in January and February, when we plan on going back to the council at council meetings to select, revise and select in that order, the final draft map. This map must be adopted again by mid-April. We have given ourselves enough leeway that if we can't adopt by February, we still have some time to play around with it. So we hope to see you either at some of these community workshops, either in this round or in the next round, or perhaps if you can at one of the public hearings in City Hall.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin, for that summary. And we'll go to the final slide here. So this is, again, a general reminder that key date, a major date coming up is that October 5th hearing at 6:30. We want to really encourage you to visit the AnaheimRedistricting.org website. We've got a little screen grab of it here, but that is really the central hub where the city's invested a lot of resources into all the transparency around this process, as well as all the tools and information that are available now and the ones that will be available when the data is actually released. So please make sure you visit that website, bookmark it, and you can really kind of become a super redistricting nerd in Anaheim and spend some time visiting that website and reading all about stuff. And of course, there's that email reference there for redistricting@anaheim.net. That's a great place to send any of your comments, communities of interest, ask questions. That's the central repository we're using to document all that. So we welcome the public's participation. For those of you who don't want to talk but want to type, it's a great way to send some information. With that, Teresa, I want to hand it over to you to bring us to a close this evening. And I also just want to pause and thank Dr. Justin Levitt for his time tonight and excellent presentation and summary and answering the questions for the community tonight. I appreciate that. Back to you, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryder, for engaging the community in the discussion, and to Justin Levitt. So thank you both for hosting this meeting and inviting the community. So again, just as Ryder mentioned, we have the website we're inputting all our information, uploading with all up to date, the links and presentations. Also want to highlight on the contact tab that's on that website, there is opportunity to subscribe to the Notify Me, which will include you in a subscription list that any updates we do to the page, any updates to upcoming meetings, when maps are available. So we're using that as just a way to also reach out to those that are interested. So definitely subscribe to that subscription so you can get ongoing information, and definitely come back to visit to the website. So thank you to all the community members joining us. Thank you for the conversation and the feedback and the input you provided, and being part of this meeting, and look forward to joining us at another community meeting, because as Ryder mentioned, it's going to be the same information as we presented, but does offer the opportunity to additional conversations and input, and you're hearing from other members of the community. So thank you again, and have a good evening.